Hey everyone, happy Monday. Here's a look at the US weather outlook for this week. And I wanted to first jump back to last week and really what we've seen with the storm system that's currently across the Northeast and really what it did coming into California on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. If we look at mid-level vorticity and winds, this is 500 millibars. If we sort of keep our eyes on the Gulf of Alaska here, we've been seeing very persistent troughing across this area really for the past month now. And really leading up to this, there was a couple of things that just really led to this very amplified pattern. We had a series of short waves that kept digging this trough deeper and deeper while we had this significant amplification of this ridge across the central US. And by the time we got into Christmas Eve, for example, you have this really intense deep trough across the eastern Pacific, incredibly, strong ridge across the central US. You have this very strong height or pressure gradient that, you have upwards of 100 knot winds eventually coming into California at 500 millibars. So obviously very strong winds as well at low levels. And this, essentially kind of merged as one trough that came on shore. Obviously, we've seen some pretty incredible rainfall rates, debris flows, things like that, incredibly high winds, even a tornado within Broyles Hills in Los Angeles there. And one of the things that's interesting, if we sort of like zoom forward, we can see this is where the current location of that trough is now across the Northeast and the Canadian border. But a piece of this trough actually shears off, and that does a couple of things. One, it's actually directed the flow easterly across the Sierra Nevadas and across coastal California. So we actually have Santa Ana winds or downsloping winds across much of California or portions of California right now. And usually this is a really high wildfire risk. But right now, because of all the rain that's happened, it's really less a wildfire risk and just more of an issue of a lot more trees coming down with the really saturated grounds. But this actually is going to completely shear off. And I'll get into the forecast. This is actually a forecast from earlier days past, but this storm system's actually going to come back into the U.S. later this week. Another thing I wanted to touch on is as active as it's been across the West. One of the things that's really interesting is that the snowpack for many areas is still around or below 50% of where it should be for this time of year. So we know that we had a really slow start. And it really has been pretty slow, even with all the precipitation. A lot of these storm systems have just been really warm. Now, the exception is areas that have had enough cold air, really talking about portions of Idaho, Wyoming, and western Montana. Those snowpacks are generally better. And there are portions of the Sierra Nevadas from around Lake Tahoe and south of Lake Mammoth that are in pretty good shape, but a lot of areas, a lot of ski resorts are still below average. So really, we haven't seen the full change to kind of winter mode for a lot of the western U.S. Parts of Oregon and then the Southwest have really been missing out on these storm sequences, and it just hasn't been cold enough. So still not great for the snowpack out west. As we look to the forecast for this week, as I mentioned, right now we have this pretty intense storm system across lower Michigan into southern Canada. And with that, we have a very strong pressure gradient. This area of low pressure in the low 980s for pressure. Very high pressure across the Rocky Mountains. So very strong pressure gradient. And, what we see is pretty strong northerly winds bringing in much colder air across the plains into the Midwest and now into the Northeast, where we've had blizzard conditions across the Midwest. We've actually had severe weather reports and a few tornado reports across Illinois yesterday, and then a mix of rain, freezing rain, and snow across Northeast and New England. So that combined with wind has been creating some power outage issues. Will continue to do so really over the next 24 hours before that storm system lifts out. So the forecast then kind of for the week is that system lifting out, very cold air mass coming in, not the coldest air we've seen of the year, but quite cold. Temperatures becoming 10 to 20 degrees below average for much of the central and eastern U.S. It's going to be short-lived for most areas, but what we see is a sequence of additional storms, kind of troughs coming out of Canada that are going to bring some light snow, but resurgences of that Arctic air to the mainly the Great Lakes and the Northeast. So continued cold with periods of snow for the Northeast, New England through this week as things moderate across central and the Southeast. And then we kind of turn our attention to that trough that I mentioned that had sheared off and was off the coast of California, moves back on shore later this week. It's going to bring some rain. Right now, it looks much weaker compared to the storm systems we've seen. And then as we go really into this weekend, we'll sort of see some stronger systems starting to approach the Pacific Northwest. I'll also call out this storm system to actually bring some much needed rain to the Southeast this weekend as well. And then really as we go into next week, it looks like it's more the same. conditions get pretty active for the west, not as intense as we've seen through earlier portions of this month, but still enough to, perhaps cause some issues with flooding. Snow levels will start out pretty high. They should come down enough to bring some snow. But really, if we look at first the impacts of this winter storm, we're looking at, moderate to major impacts for a lot of area across Great Lakes, Northeast. Again, combination of winter precipitation and winds, and then as I mentioned, a similar pattern that we've seen for a lot of this winter continues into next week, above average for much of the U.S. With more than likely above average precipitation for much of the West, especially the California area, and it looks like that's going to continue through next week.